Before we begin today's program, I just want to quickly recap on yesterday. By the way, those of you who were not here yesterday, my name is Tassisius Kabutaulaka, and I'm currently the director of the Center for Pacific Island Studies. I thought we had a really productive and vibrant discussions, diverse as well as vibrant discussions yesterday. And one thing I was thinking at the end of yesterday was that in many ways, the sea was quite familiar. What was sometimes unfamiliar were the currents and waves that were moving in different directions. But the discussions show that there are lots of familiarity with people as well as with the kinds of issues that we were talking about. We had two very powerful keynote speakers yesterday. And the discussions moved from things like the multi-layered, multi-dimensional, and multi-sided as well as multi-issued nature of Pacific Island studies, but at the same time is rooted and connected. We also talked about the role of museums in Oceania and how it could be decolonized. Pacific Islanders online and how people in the diaspora in particular have used online or the internet to construct identities, construct and express identities, and as a tool for education. There were also discussions about music as a medium or tool for assistance, particularly in the case of West Papua, but we also heard about creative art and anti-nuclear testing in the 1970s, coming out of places like Fiji in particular, the University of the South Pacific. There were discussions about kava ceremony as a form of resistance against colonialism. Issues of access to healthcare in Hawaii for Kofa citizens and the people who were behind that. There were also discussions of geopolitics, the relationship between China and Taiwan, discussions about the sustenance of culture in highly urbanized and militarized places, the pandemic and militarism and indigenous people's responses to that. We ended the day with discussions of race relations, particularly the Black Pacific issue. So we had a really wonderful day yesterday, and I'm looking forward to a full day of discussions and again, more vibrant talk story today. So welcome all of you. Welcome to the second day of our student conference. I'm going to pass it over to Axel, who will introduce us to our keynote speaker this morning. Axel.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. So, I want to say to the lands and spaces we occupy, to our chiefs, the staff and faculty of CPIS, to our audience members for joining us today, to our panelists and speakers, and to our planning committee members. Lastly, to all the things that roam the earth and the heavens above. Is an apology and a request for forgiveness. It acknowledges that you could have been anywhere in the world, the World Wide Web today, and you chose to be here with us on Zoom, and we appreciate that. It acknowledges the work that has been put into the conference by everyone here today also. So I want to start off by saying aloha, moithin, and yakwe. I'm not sure what Zoom features are possible for the audience members, but if possible, please share your greetings in your language and where you're zooming in from in the chat. My name is Axel Defrian. I'm a graduate assistant at the Center for Pacific Island Studies at UH Manoa. And it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the second day of the 9th Annual Center for Pacific Island Studies Student Conference. Dr. Wilfred Alik. Dr. Wilfred Alik is a family medicine doctor who serves as clinic chief for the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hilo, Hawaiʻi. Born and raised in the Marshall Islands, Dr. Alik attended Xavier High School in Chuuk, class of 1980, Creighton University, and Western Oregon University. He received his medical degree from the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa. He is also an active member of the Micronesian Health Advisory Coalition. And previously he served on a special medical team under the US Department of Energy, which provided medical care to Marshallese people exposed to radioactive nuclear testing. His parents were both educators and encouraged him to do his best in life, which shaped him into who he is today. Personally speaking, for me, Dr. Alik's voice is important to address the theme of the conference, but also the events of this past year. As a Yapese, as a Micronesian, and as a Pacific Islander living in the state of Hawaii, I know how much it hurts to see news headlines and government officials blame our culture for our high rates of death and infection, and then forget about us when the dust settles. I know how much it feels to see our children left behind by teachers and our people neglected by healthcare providers. That's why it's inspiring for me to know that a Marshallese, a Micronesian, and a Pacific Islander, Dr. Alik, thrived in the healthcare industry and also through education. It was also inspiring for me to see that he headed the Marshall Islands COVID-19 Task Force, as he and other Marshallese and Pacific Islander community leaders led grassroots efforts in all major Hawaiian islands to bridge the gap between the state government and Pacific Islander communities. During this time, volunteers organized food and mass drives, trained contact tracers, and educated members of their communities in their own language and in culturally competent ways. So big thank you to Dr. Alik and our Pacific Islander community leaders in the Pacific Islander COVID-19 Task Force for showing us that we are not just victims and survivors, but that we are leaders and mentors. Mahalo nui, komotada, and so kumaraga. Thank you, Dr. Alik. You can speak whenever you're ready.
Yogalip, and Wilfred, Yudogan Potuchi Melalek and coronavirus, a pandemic. And our Chalan Melalek, Kia, is all good case game. Igichen, Naganabijin. Alabar Chalan Melalek, Armijin, Pacific Islander, Elaba Lukun Rologen, Chen Kizin. If just I would put your Konar and Kachiong, Rebich, Penchabaji Kizin. Iparkanan kumu orchon wuno kia, a vaccine and paparai kizin. A manajon tagada, emuja bug vaccine in, kanage enjibanga, pamalia gapchuchun terra. Vaccine in, Yalaban, Kajur, Kabaman Kokoran Binwing. He's safe. He is Rajan Kum, Okum chosen bug vaccine in. Yakum Darom, Okanajan.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you, Axel, for the kind introduction. Aloha kako, and good morning, everyone. I wanted to show the video not only to humbly introduce myself and what I do, but to highlight the importance of getting the COVID-19 vaccine. As you all know, we're still in the midst of the pandemic. This is why we are here on Zoom today. As humans, by nature, we need social interactions, especially as islanders. It's what we do. It's ingrained in our culture. We love to gather for birthday luau's, church and singing events, COVID sessions, and other group activities, for instance. But this pandemic has halted most of these. We can only stay in isolation for so long. That's why it's so important that we must do all we can, not only to prevent contracting and spreading the disease, but to get back to some formal normal life. Fortunately, we have amazing vaccines which can help us do just that. And these vaccines, they're safe and effective. I myself am grateful I have taken the vaccine, and I have very minimal side effects. And I hope you would consider doing the same as well. I strongly feel it is our best hope to get out of this health crisis. And speaking of COVID-19, I would like to share briefly the Hawaii Marshallese community's response to the pandemic. We had formed a task force last year in May when we realized that this pandemic was going to be devastating to our community. The task force is grassroots volunteer groups comprised of all across the islands, both Marshallese and non-Marshallese leaders in the community. Our primary task was merely education, to ensure the community had the proper knowledge and information to make informed decisions, to avoid being infected, and to follow the state's health guidelines in a way that they can understand in the language that's culturally competent and sensitive. We held numerous virtual town hall meetings targeting faith-based groups and other stakeholders in the community. Also, we had coordinated wraparound services, mass drive-in events, handing out face masks, care packs, and foods. We also tried to reach out to other micronations and Pacific Islander groups for collaboration. Because really, at the end of the day, we're all in this together. I would like to think that the task force has certainly made a difference in helping to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 in our communities. However, what I'm mostly proud of is the fact that the community didn't just sit by, but really stepped up to take the initiative to be part of this solution. Also, if I may, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the 67th anniversary of the US nuclear weapon testing in the Marshall Islands, which took place on March 1st, 1954 on Bikini Island. May I ask that we take a brief moment of silence and remembrance of those fellow Pacific Islanders who fell victim to the nuclear testing. Thank you. My talk today is neither about the vaccine nor the coronavirus pandemic or the nuclear testing, although those are very important topics, just in case you're wondering. But before I proceed to my main presentation, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank the sponsors and organizers of this wonderful event and for the invite. It is indeed my honor and privilege to be in the midst of Pacific Islander scholars. I'm grateful to be given a platform to share a little, or as the locals would say, talk story with you all virtually. When my friend Keola, a graduate of this fine program and institution, reached out to me several months ago to ask if I was interested in taking part in this forum, I readily said, yes, I accept it. And not to be pretentious, as I knew being a keynote speaker seemed a tall order, as it implied that you must have something worthwhile or of some value to share or convey to your audience. But I also recognized and strongly felt that it was important, a platform not to pass up. And even if I had nothing important or relevant to say or share, I thought the mere optics and engagement were just as important and relevant. I think we need to encourage more Pacific Islanders to be more visible and engage participants, especially matters concerning the Pacific Islands. After all, this is the center of the Pacific Island studies. So please bear with me for the next several minutes. And I thank you in advance for listening and for your attention. First, a little disclaimer. I am not a social scientist or an expert on Pacific Island studies by any means. What I'm presenting here today is based on my own personal perspective and observation. I'm a medical doctor, as you saw in the video, but I think there are parallels that can be drawn between medicine and Pacific Island studies, or anthropology for the matter. One is primarily concerned with preservation of human life, and the other, preservation and study of all things human. In deciding what to say or impart to you today, I wanted to make sure it was of some value, but more importantly, it's in alignment and relevant to the theme of the conference. Navigating our unfamiliar seas, cultivating connections in changing space. Navigating our unfamiliar seas, cultivating connections in changing space, which, by the way, is very relevant and very insightful, given the current challenges and uncertainties of our times. In pondering this theme, I am reminded of stories of ancient Marshallese who were fierce and skillful wayfinders, masterful voyagers and navigators. I've always been fascinated by how our Marshallese ancestors were able to make sense of the world in which they inhabited and how they had effectively built thriving culture and communities. How they were able to invent an intricate navigational system while mastering the physics of wave and ocean current patterns and the celestial universe by only employing keen observational skills. It's beyond imagination. And they had to learn all of it by committing to rote memorization. Nothing was written down. They were astronomers and oceanographers in their own rights. Equipped with such knowledge and skill sets, they certainly were able to successfully navigate their own unfamiliar seas of that time and space. This innate talent or trait, which may be referred to as native ingenuity, is not specific to the Marshallese, for it's prevalent all across the Pacific Island cultures and traditions. This is a photo of a Marshallese traditional canoe called wallop. And these can carry up to like 100 people. The outrigger canoe was an essential and integral part of the Marshallese culture and landscape. And I'm sure it's the same for all across the Pacific Island communities and cultures. It was built to last, to be durable, and to be able to withstand any of the harsh elements of the vast Pacific Ocean. Marshallese were skillful and masterful wayfinders, high sea voyagers, and navigators. They were known to fiercely navigate and explore the unfamiliar high seas of the vast and often treacherous Pacific Ocean. in search of not only means of sustenance, but to connect with other island communities for which they had cultivated and maintained connections and relationships. Because they had realized that what had sustained their culture was not only the essential sustenance, but human connections and relationships. Their survival depended on creating a space that was conducive not only to learning about their own culture, of their world and environment, but to cultivating a thriving culture based on mutual respect, collaboration, and shared collective values, as evidenced by some of their words. Proverbs. Kajuor, a Marshallese proverb, which roughly translates as more is enough, as in more people. The more people you have, the more strength you have. The more people you have, the more strength you have. Another saying, which means sharing what little you may have, even if it's little, out of love. Sharing what little you may have, even if it's little, out of love. Sharing what you have with others, even if it's little or small. That was the way of life, which placed a high premium on certain norms of social interactions, which promoted extended family relationships and sharing of resources. As an example of that is the Marshallese system of land inheritance. So the canoe was the instrument which firmly bound the social fabric of the culture together. Their survival and existence basically depended on the canoe. Wakukwa Jimor. That's a Marshallese saying, which basically means canoe that tightly binds us together. Why is the canoe? Kuk means closeness, tightness, or tightly packed together. Jumor means collaboration or togetherness. In traditional times, everyone had to gather to join forces to help launch the canoe onto the water or back onto the shores. It was a collective task expected of every man in the village. This was the genius of the culture, which depended primarily on cooperation and collective responsibility. It's all about the collective good. The canoe was more than a mode of transportation. It played a vital force in galvanizing and bringing the island community together around a common purpose. Building a canoe was a major village undertaking. It was a task shared by the whole village or the island community. Everyone in the village had a role in building of the canoe. It was division of labor, with everyone contributing. For example, women would weave the sail, older men would make rope or ekol from dried coconut husk to be used to tie parts of the canoe together. And younger able men would chop down trees that would be used in building the main hull of the canoe. In fact, the canoe was such an intertwined and integral part of the culture that many of the parts of the canoe represented or corresponded to values and customs of the Marshallese culture. For instance, the bottom part of the canoe's main hull, or the backbone of the canoe, is called Joch, which means in Marshallese, kindness. This is the part of the canoe that had to be strong, sturdy, and durable in order to withstand and carry loads of people and belongings abroad on these long and arduous voyaging expeditions. So it makes sense to embrace Joch, or kindness, as high virtue in a society like that of the Marshallese culture, where its survival depended heavily on sharing and collaboration. Jojo Norio, a Marshallese saying which means to live is to be kind, or being kind is the way to life. Therefore, it's not surprising that the backbone of the canoe is called Joch, or kindness, as is the basis for social interactions in a culture which highly valued cooperation and respect for one another. This was part of the canoe that must be strong and sturdy enough to ensure safety and durability of the boys. It was the most important part of the canoe, and by extension, of their culture and traditions. Because they knew and understood that this canoe would not only be a source of nourishment, but it would expand their horizons and would connect them to other potential possibilities as they would navigate their own unfamiliar seas. The Marshall Islands are scattered over 750 square miles of open ocean. Therefore, the Marshallese had to be adept and skillful in navigating this vast space of wide open ocean. So it was necessary and imperative to cultivate a culture of higher learning, of intellectual curiosity, to be able to understand and learn about their own world and environment. They had to devise a system of learning to fully comprehend and study the intricate elements of astronomy and oceanography. They had to learn by rote memorization, the star positions, wind directions, and wave patterns. They were, in a sense, scientists, and the ocean and the skies were their laboratories. They had to have what, excuse me, they had to have that native or indigenous ingenuity, which can be defined as the physical and mental capacities to make sense of the natural phenomenon of the world and the universe in which they live. They were able to invent a sophisticated system of navigation and voyaging that could rival any navigational system. This is the stick chart, represents a traditional map of the Marshall Islands with wave and current patterns, represented by the sticks, the wave and current patterns, interlaced with islands, the shells. It was used to guide traditional navigators. A master navigator is able to feel the sway of wave swells and motions and ocean current patterns to determine and set the course of the canoe on its destination. He is able to see wave directions and determine which wave we're moving to and away from islands. He is able to gaze into the sky and find subtle clues as to his exact navigational locations. That is native ingenuity. It was native ingenuity that guided Papa Pialuk from Sarawak to safely and successfully navigate Hokulea, the Hawaiian traditional canoe, in its maiden voyage to Tahiti, even though he had never been there before. Hokulea, in recent times, had successfully circumnavigated the globe, relying heavily on traditional voyaging skills. That is native ingenuity. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at the Marshallese High School student graduation party the Hilo Marshallese community had organized. There were 14 graduates, and 9 of whom had received high honors. The community was very proud of their achievement. And in my remarks, I reminded the community that what the honor students had just accomplished was near impossible if you have considered their circumstances. Many of these kids had come from homes whose parents worked 2 to 3 jobs. Some had to care for their younger siblings when not in school. Others had to work part-time to help support their family. Not to mention struggles with the language barrier. So given all these barriers and challenges, they had every reason to fail. I think native ingenuity has something to do with it. Many years ago, when I was in medical school here at this fine university, Yes, many, many years ago. I had lots of self-doubts as to whether I was going to make it. And a big part of that was because I didn't have any role models at the time. There were no other Marshallese person before me who had gone to US medical school. I had no one to look up to. I wasn't sure if I had what it took to make it in a US medical school system. And as you may know, the education level in the Marshalls, probably the rest of Micronesia, wasn't in the same caliber as it is today. So there are many barriers and unfamiliar seas along the way to which I had to navigate. In hindsight, I'd like to think with all humility that I must have a bit of something working on my behalf, native ingenuity, which might have been what helped me successfully navigate my own unfamiliar seas at the time in pursuing on my studies in medicine. I am sure there are numerous examples of native ingenuity among many Pacific Islanders in various walks of life. It is native ingenuity that had guided the Marshallese and other Pacific Islanders on a steady course as they navigated their unfamiliar seas of the vast Pacific Ocean, searching for possibilities for growth and connections. It is that sense of resilience, perseverance, and determination that even when faced with uncertainties and incredible odds, you must stay the course. There's ample retrospective evidence in our own stories and legends that such traits and innate abilities do exist in every Pacific Islander. And you don't need to look too far to find it. All you have to do is dig a little deeper to connect with your past ancestors, to harness that native ingenuity. Is truly liberating and empowering. I wish you all great success as you navigate your own voices in your life's own unfamiliar seas in search of the right spaces to cultivate and form meaningful connections. May the native ingenuity force be with you. I leave you with this quote from another medical doctor, Jonas Salk. Our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors. Bon voyage, happy navigating, best wishes. Thank you, mahalo nui, komoltala.
Thank you, Dr. Wilfred, komoltala, kumwar. I was really moved by the concept of native ingenuity you mentioned, because sometimes I feel that we get lost in this all this academics, that we lose sight of the things that we've learned at the roots of us growing up, things that the classroom cannot teach, that we our gut instincts teach us along the way, as we navigate these unfamiliar seas. So if our participants could please drop any question that they'd like answered in the Q&A section of the Zoom. We'll start with one. Heather asks, there were many hesitations to take the Kaiser vaccine because it was not FDA approved when it was released. What is your opinion on the vaccines being dispersed into our community?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, yes, you're right. So, let me just kind of add some context to this. So, vaccines, normally it takes like 5 to 10 years to come up with a vaccine. It's a long process, okay? Very long. So in the United States, you got to through different layers to get to approval, okay? But there were a lot of, red tapes, kind of like, that were like, there were a lot of, that were removed to get the vaccinations going. Because, we can't wait, it's like, we got to get this done quickly. And luckily, we have the technology, actually, it's been around for a long time. You might have heard of the mRNA vaccines. So that's a little different. Yeah. So normally when you make a vaccine, at least in the classical sense, you would take let's see, for example, the flu, okay, virus, okay, and you kind of like weaken the flu, and then inject it into you to induce immunity. So with the mRNA vaccines, what they do is actually they don't use that virus, okay. They actually take the genetic code of that virus, okay, so coronavirus, and wrap this into this thing called mRNA. Okay, so it's not the piece of the vaccine, it's actually the information. So it's like, the blueprint. That's what they call it, messenger RNA, and then inject it into you. And this mRNA goes into your cells and direct your cells to make the proteins that induce immunity. So it's impossible for you to get sick, first of all, because you're not getting a piece of the vaccine, yeah. All right. And number two, there are a lot of studies done. So they did actually it's like an 8-month kind of process. There were close to like 80,000 people in the studies. None of them got sick, okay? None of them ended up in the hospital. And there was like 95% effective. That's what they're saying, it's 95% effective and it's safe, especially in preventing severe disease, hospitalization, and deaths. So it really makes sense. So we're lucky to have this kind of this kind of technology, which they can come up pretty quickly to make vaccines. So yeah, it's so Pfizer and Moderna is the same thing. It's the same mRNA vaccines. So those are 2 approved right now. Okay, and then there's another one, it's been just recently approved. But all these vaccines are safe and effective. I'm not sure if I answered your question. So ask me again, please. Thank you.
No, I think that was really detailed. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for breaking it down for us. We have some more other questions. Melanie asks, how did you feel leaving the Marshall Islands to pursue your education? Me personally, I just wanted to also add on top of that, if I may, to kind of ask what inspired you to leave home and to go to college, knowing, having these feelings, first of all.
Yeah, so those are really good questions. Just like any normal island kids, I never knew, I never planned ahead of time, I was going to go to college. It's just kind of, things that kind of happened, as time went on. Yeah, I went to high school in Chuuk, Xavier High School. So a lot of the kids the graduates were expected to go to college. That's kind of part of the, I guess, the pathway. My parents were both educators. They were both teachers. And education was a big deal in our family. In fact, a lot of my siblings went to college. We didn't have much, it's not like we had the means, but luckily there was Pell Grants and all this assistance from the United States that a lot of these kids to go to college. Yeah, so so I was kind of really kind of forced into it, I would say. My parents wanted me to go to college, and it kind of like any other kids, went to college and kind of just built from there. I never really planned to be a doctor. I've always wanted to be maybe a teacher. Okay, so in fact, my major was in science. I was a physics major. Okay, because I wanted to be a teacher. But things kind of change as time goes on. And it really, I remember even in high school, my summer jobs would be working at the hospital. There was something, I don't want to call it fate, but there was something kind of propelled me to that kind of work. So I did a lot of my volunteer works summertime at the hospital, and it kind of went from there. Yeah. Okay. I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, thank you. So Deon asks, in a world that tells Native youth to dissociate from their ancestry to succeed, do you have any advice to students who may be listening to reconnect if they've been hesitant?
Come again, sorry.
In a world that tells Native youth to dissociate from their ancestry to succeed, do you have any advice for students who may be listening to reconnect if they've been hesitant?
Yeah, this is a very deep and a good question. Okay, that's kind of a bulk of my talk. That's I've always been I've always been a strong believer in our, our ability. Okay. And in my talk, and I say, all you have to do is look back to your history. Okay. And kind of see like what happened, what these guys did. And when I look at that, it's like, these guys were like, they were, like I said, they were scientists. They had the innate ability, the intellect to be able to survive. So to me, I'd say, reconnect with your people. You can't dissociate. In order to understand your future, you got to look to your past. Okay, you got to remember where you're coming from. Remember where you're coming from. Like, that will help you reconnect and help you. You need to look to the past to move forward. And I kind of see how you can dissociate with your past. I think also part of the process, past, present, and future. That's your story. And yes.
Thank you. So Tamara asks, Native ingenuity is indeed something to be proud of and look to for inspiration. As a medical doctor, what are your views on traditional medicine and practices around postpartum care?
Yeah, so really good question, Tamara. So I am pretty open-minded. Okay, so I learned medicine. That's Western medicine. Medicine is just that's one medicine. Okay, that's Western medicine. Okay, but medicine is holistic. It's like it's a whole body. It's holistic. It's body and spirit. So I have no problem like incorporating native medicines. In fact, if it makes sense and all that, I tell patients that's fine. Okay, I know a lot of Marshallese who do practice the native medicines, and to me, like it's not an issue as long as there's no contraindications or problem with the medications. But I'm open to all that. Yeah, so it's not. Yeah, it should be incorporated into. Especially now, there's another, they call alternative medicine now. It's a big deal. Okay, so they have the Western medicine and they have the alternative medicine. So those two, like, I have no problem, like, reconciling those two. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Tamara, but yeah, my view is like, I believe in like, native medicine. So when my kids were born, yeah, they went through all that process. Yeah, Marshallese, when babies are born, they have to go through these rituals, getting the kids, the babies, undergo these medicinal rituals, which I'm totally have no problem with that.
Thank you. I also believe in the power of our native medicines that Yappies have back home. Kayla asks, says, thank you, Dr. Alik. What do you see as the greatest barrier for our young Pacific adults as they navigate this modern and globalized way of life? And how do they overcome this challenge while preserving their cultural identity? In addition, he also asks, do you have plans to return home?
Yeah, very good question, Kiola. So yeah, that's a tough one. Okay, so how do you navigate this unfamiliar seas? So it's I think it's important to be grounded. Okay, some kind of like grounding. Okay, so that's where your identity comes in. Okay, look into your past, understanding your culture. Native ingenuity is all about that. Okay, knowing that hey, I got this. Okay, I have the ability to do this. That's in you. That's this is where you're harnessing your past, harnessing your culture to help you. Okay, I think as long as you like use as your anchor, like your kind of it will give you like an even keel. You can remember where you came from. Okay, because it's easy to like get lost in this in this maze, especially like as young Pacific Islanders trying to like make sense of all of this. You gotta have some kind of base, an anchor, something you can kind of like build upon. So this is where I think your culture comes in. Okay, where you came from. Look for that for source of inspirations and guidance. I think that will guide you. Just like those guys back there, man. That was their source. Okay, it will keep you like on an even keel. All right. At the same time, learning all you need to learn. Okay. To me, education is all about, you got to be smarter tomorrow than today. It's evolving. Yeah. So that's what education is. Building knowledge, acquiring knowledge. Tomorrow, I got to be smarter than today. So having that kind of this kind of base to help you, keep you on an even keel, that by looking to your past and acquiring knowledge, to me, that's a way to move forward. Okay. You can always filter what you don't need to know. Okay. What's important to you. Yes. The second part of the question, yes, I plan to go home. There's nothing better than going home, man. That's yeah. I'd rather be under a coin in a tree, sipping coin and fishing.
Good, thank you. Likewise. An anonymous attendee asks, it can become very daunting as a Micronesian to be in higher education. What advice would you give to young Micronesians moving toward this path?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I had the same kind of challenges, as I said in my little talk, when I got into medical school, I had a lot of self-doubts, man. Not only because there were no other Marshallese, before me, but it's a very rigorous, discipline. I didn't, I didn't know you had what it takes to make it. To me, I think the best way is just kind of believe in yourself. Okay, this is where native ingenuity comes in again. Believe in yourself that you have that talent. It's in you. Okay, you can do this. We're smart people. Okay, that's how we survive in those small islands. You've got that. Okay, all you need to do is build on that. All right. So to me, you have the ability to begin with. Number two, you gotta have faith in yourself. Yeah. All right. Okay. You gotta have faith in yourself and just keep moving forward. And there is no substitute for hard work. You gotta do all that work. Okay. You gotta do all the heavy lifting. To me, if all that line up, you can do just about anything you decide to do.
Thank you. Melinda has a question. Do you have ideas of how divided non-Indigenous communities could incorporate Marshallese values of cooperation, collaboration, connectedness, etc.?
Okay, that's a loaded question. What's the question again?
Do you have ideas of how divided non-Indigenous communities could incorporate Marshallese values of cooperation, collaboration, connectedness, and etc.?
So if I understand the question is asking about non-Indigenous, Marshallese incorporating Marshallese values, is that the essence of the question? So yeah, so this is all about to me, and a lot of these the borders of racial discriminations and prejudice and all that. So this is where, to me, education is very important now. Okay, people who are ignorant, it's not because they're ignorant, it's because they're not educated. So this is where a lot of education needs to take place. Same thing here in the States. People that have issues with Micronesians. A lot of times because they don't understand us. Okay. And this is where education needs to take place. And we need to do that. And that part is actually on us to educate them. That's one way to get these people to know us. It's not on them, it's on us. Okay, non-Indigenous to understand where we came from. And that's where we need to actively be part of that process, yeah. Because they're not going to take the initiative to understand us. We need to say, hey, okay, I'm here. This is who I am. This is all it's what I do. That's, to me, that's what we got to do. More education, making sure that people understand where we came from. And that's the only way to kind of really moving forward, I think.
Thank you. I also have that challenge to walking with others and trying to walk the line between cultural appropriation and respectful integration of values. We have a question. In the face of the pandemic, how has Native ingenuity guided the Marshallese response in Hawaii?
Yes, so I can speak for a task force. So I think one of the, to me, this is where kind of our values come in. We took the initiative, because we understood that the best people to help ourselves is ourselves, right? Okay. We understand our culture. We know what to do. So that's step number one. Yeah. So also, because of a culture of collective responsibility, the common goods, ohana family, it's easy to get people together and say, we're doing this not just for you but for the family. All right, and that's already ingrained in us. Okay, that almost everything we do is for the family. So it wasn't hard to say, you got to do this stuff because it's not just about you, it's about your grandma, your grandpa. Okay, so Native ingenuity, I think it's part of that. Okay, that kind of understanding that this isn't about me, it's about all of us. Okay, and I think a lot of Pacific Islanders understand the concept. Okay, this collective shared value, working together, sharing. Okay, that's not easy to understand in our culture. So that, to me, that's Native ingenuity. Kind of okay, this is not about me. You don't have to teach it because it's almost kind of in you. You can understand it. So that was the easy part. So I think that's where culture, Native ingenuity comes in.
Thank you. Melinda has a comment, not a question, but says, thank you, insightful answer. Anonymous attendee asks, you mentioned earlier that social interaction is ingrained in our culture and it's mostly done with our families. How do you connect with your family back home in the Marshall Islands and cope with being far away?
Yeah, so thank God we have technology, okay? Because I remember when I was in college way back then, man, writing letters, and I hate writing letters. So that's kind of one of the ways to kind of get connected. And there were few telephones at the time. I remember it took a while for the Marshalls to finally get international telephone. So it was very tough. But with modern technology, the world is smaller. Okay, very easy. So we can easily talk to families. Messenger, Facebook. There's different platforms that's available. So to me, that allows that really kind of bring people closer together. So yeah, so that's how I kind of try to communicate with my families. Would be nice to be there, okay, in front of them in person, but as you know, it's not cheap flying home, okay, and also the borders are closed right now. But I'm always looking forward to going home and meeting with families because, like I said before, it's nothing like going home, man.
Thank you. Another anonymous attendee asks, the COVID pandemic seems like it has made the general public more aware of some of the healthcare access inequities that long existed in Hawaii and the US. Do you think this will have an impact on how healthcare is delivered moving forward?
Yes, I hope so. Yeah, right. So there's major health disparities, as you mentioned. So what the pandemic did is actually just expose all of that. Bring it to the forefront. We knew that there was major health disparities among Micronesians and Pacific Islanders. So I'm hoping this will precipitate policy changes, okay, to help this population. So I think an example of that, the Medicaid, reform, which would be wanted to for Micronesians, that finally got passed in this pandemic. Prior to that, it took a long time, to get it passed. I'm talking about the Medicaid eligibility for Micronesians, qualified citizens. But because of this pandemic, they realized that, these guys are, really having problems. So it kind of makes sense to them, the policy people, to pass that. So So I'm hoping a lot of these, this pandemic, to me, that's one of the silver linings about this pandemic. It exposed all these problems that we have, and hoping that the health policy, the policymakers will see that and trying to act on those. Yeah, so I think it's one of the silver linings in this pandemic, as I said.
Thank you. Another anonymous attendee asks, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services states that, quote, in comparison to other ethnic groups, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have higher rates of smoking, alcohol consumption, and obesity. This group also has less access to cancer prevention and control programs. Some leading causes of death among Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders include cancer, heart disease, unintentional injuries, accidents, stroke, and diabetes, end quote. What are some of the ways we can address these health concerns within our own communities?
Yeah, very good question. So if you think about these questions are actually, if you think about it, you can actually break it down into, these are all lifestyle related problems, okay? Lifestyle related problems. So from the perspective, it's easy to make changes, yeah? Because all you need to do is, number one, I think as a start, make some lifestyle changes. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, those are lifestyle related problems. Sure, there are some, genetics, factors, but mostly these are lifestyle related problems. So I think first thing to do is like really try and change the lifestyle, and this is where the nutrition, exercise, all that needs to happen. Yeah. So having programs like that to combat all that, okay, because you don't want to get to where you're taking medications, okay. So this is where lifestyle begins, like changing lifestyles, the way we eat, okay, all that, exercise and all that can be done. It's not something hard to do. All right, so we need to have programs in place to make those changes. Smoking is a lifestyle problem. Smoking leads to cancer, diabetes, heart attack, stroke. That's a lifestyle problem, yeah. Same thing with the weight, obesity. So these are things that can be easily implemented with the right programs in place and supports, because yeah, it is all these, even like a lot of these cancer screening programs, those can also be really, if it's well coordinated, we can prevent a lot of these preventable cancers like cervical cancers, breast cancers, okay? So there are really effective programs in place. It can be done.
Thank you for that. Another anonymous attendee asks, what made you stay in Hawaii after medical school? What advice do you have to Pacific Islander students who are at this crossroads between going back home to help decrease the brain drain, but also looking for opportunities that may not be available back home?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I had to struggle with that, okay? Whether I should be home or here, okay? At one point, I was more towards going home. But once you have families, then it's not all about, it's no longer about yourself now, okay? It's not a selfish decision anymore. You got to think about your family. And so that a lot of the kind of play into the factors, economic opportunities for your kids and, education, all that, that, come to that. So I'm always a big proponent of going home, okay, if you can, because yeah, you're right. They need us, okay? You will make a big difference home. I make a difference here, but I'll make a bigger difference back home, okay? The good thing with medicine, you could be making a difference anywhere you go. So I really encourage you to consider a field of medicine, okay? I'm not saying like the other fields are not as good, but in medicine, you could be anywhere you go to, even here, because we have a lot of Marshallese and Micronesians coming to Hawaii now. That's a lot of my patients are, Marshallese, Micronesians. So there's a need for that, yeah, okay? And I feel like I make a difference in their lives, Yeah, so, but, if you can go home, that's the, do it, yeah.
Thank you. I believe we have a little less than 10 minutes left. unless our other committee members can correct me. But I just have a couple other questions too. I think we have time for. I was just wondering what ways of collaboration would you like to see between the state government of Hawaii and Pacific Islander communities?
Yeah, very good question. So I think they need to invite us to the table, okay? Make us part of the process, part of the solutions, okay? We need to participate. They need to invite us to be a part of the discussion. I think that's what is what's missing. And I'll give you an example. With the pandemic, I wish they had invited a lot of the people in our community to be part of that decision process before things happen. An example of that is even outreaching to patients who had contracted the disease. You need people who can speak the language, who understand the culture. That didn't happen until later. Okay, so I'm hoping that the states and the county level, they would get more, invite more Micronesians to be part of that solutions. Give them a seat at the table. Okay, because I know there are lots of people who can do this. A lot of Micronesians. There are a lot of talented Micronesians who are able to do all that stuff. We just need the opportunity, okay, and the voice. So I'm hoping the states, could do that and say, you know what, let's give these guys, their voice, because that would, it's going to be a win-win. That's just for the states, but for our communities.
Thank you. Another question, I guess, pertains more for back home, but also for here. What do you envision as the new normal? This term they keep saying, for Pacific Island countries and islanders living abroad, or for back home. I guess just asking this question so that we can better be prepared for the next pandemic, to avoid a lot of the issues that happened, or even people being locked out of their homes.
Okay, I'm not sure where to understand the question. Sorry, come again. It's
I guess just asking how can we better be prepared for the next pandemic? Any advice you have for that can be applied back home or here? Because some of the issues we had was these high infection rates, islanders being locked out of their countries. What can we do better to be better prepared for the next pandemic that may occur in the future?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because even for the advanced countries, they're struggling with those kind of questions. Take the United States. I mean, the most advanced country in the world, yet the most infections, most deaths. Okay, they weren't ready. So for small countries like ours, we got to be even more prepared. If the United States and bigger countries can't do it, then we need to really step up. And this where stronger public health systems, making sure that not just for any pandemic, any public health issues, we need to be ready for that. For example, the dengue fever, measles, and all that. So we need to have stronger public health component, countries ready to mobilize if anything like this happens. Everyone is all caught by surprise. But to the credits of a lot of these Pacific Island nations, it's actually very minimal cases over there. None. I think in the Marshalls, almost zero. Same thing with Palau and the other places. I'm sure you have too, FSM. So I think it's just kind of be vigilant, be aware, okay, of what's going on, because it's better to be proactive than be reactive, and this is what we did. A lot of what we did in the islands were reacting to what happened. So just to be aware and kind of be ready for it. Have a strong public health presence, so when these things happen, we can easily mobilize and take care of it.
Yeah, thank you. So we just have a few minutes more for a couple other questions. Anonymous person asks about the new norm in context of our cultures. So how have we changed cultural practices to accommodate social distance? What more can we do? And what harm will there be for our communal cultures with ongoing social distance?
Yeah, so one of the problem with this pandemic, it's almost like Pacific Islander, okay? Because like in all this stuff we do, you can't in a pandemic. We like to like get together, family, like, a lot of our, multi-generational homes, group activities. You can't do any of this stuff in a pandemic. So it's kind of like a really kind of anti, Pacific Island in a way, because that's our culture. But I think we need to realize that this is actually a health crisis. Okay, that's the thing, health crisis, and it's not forever. Our culture, or these things that we're doing, can be suspended for a while. Okay, I don't think there's going to be any harm. If we say, you know what, okay, we're going to postpone that luau, we're going to postpone that, whatever, group activity. Okay, those can be suspended, not forever. Okay, until we pass. All right, because we have one of the best culture, I think, okay, in the world. This culture of sharing, helping each other. To me, that's a good thing. But you cannot do that in a pandemic. But the good thing is this is only temporary. That's not forever. Once it's passed, then we can resume our cultures. Is it going to have damaging impact? I don't think so. Because as long as we understand that, this is only for a short while. We're not saying, don't do this. We're saying, don't do it now until this thing passes, and then we can resume all activities. And that's where the vaccinations, all that comes in, so we can get back to normal life.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry, but I believe that's all the time that we have for the keynote session. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilfred. Thank you everyone for being gathered here today. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and we'll transition to the conference Zoom link for the panel sessions. We'd also to again thank you, Dr. Wilfred Alik, for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge. So please follow the Zoom link, which will be posted in the chat for the rest of our conference today. And thank you. Please have a good day.
Thank you.